Hello? We're ready? Good afternoon. Bon après-midi. Well, welcome to this panel. We're really excited to be together with all of us. The way that we had proposed to actually have this panel was to have a personal introduction at the very beginning, a very brief introduction from the guts, from here. Then we had thought of having the presentations of the different experiences of innovative ecosystems. And then there's a reason for this fifth chair. Then we were hoping, at least, depending on what you like, to invite whoever wants to be part of the panel. You come and you sit here and you make your comments or your questions. And at the same time, if someone else wants to do the same, you just stand behind this person. And that means that this other person is invited to go back to wherever. So the idea is to, after these 3 presentations, to actually, well, if there are questions about the initiatives, fantastic, but we wanted to connect the concrete experiences, which are from different countries, with 2 levels of challenges. One, how the innovative territorial experiences can connect between themselves throughout the world, and how that fabric that is built together can also at the same time meet the kind of global challenges that we're all facing. Inequality, climate change, loss of biodiversity, all massive migrations, you just name it. So for those 2 other variables, we wanted to see if there was interest by yourselves to come and join the panel, all right? I don't know if that's something traditional here, but I'm Pedro, I'm from Argentina, I'm one of the founders of Sistema B, and we're from Mexico all the way down to Chile and Argentina, and we create systems basically for the evolution of capitalism. So instead of being profit-driven, it's value creation in all dimensions, long and short term. That's what we do with every single ecosystem B. And I'll share some experiences once, we listen to these other initiatives. So I'm just going to speak now from my guts, okay? May I? You allow me? Yes? Okay. The reason for which I live has to do with diversity and unity. And the first time I was able to express myself was, I'm Christian by heritage, and the first time I was able to express this in words, in a narrative, was when I went to Israel and started to learn from the Jewish Kabbalah. Kabbalah, I don't know how you say it in English, Kabbalah. And I learned about the mythology of Tikkun Olam. And Tikkun Olam is basically a story whereby God creates the light on the 4th day and places the light in a vase. But the light was so powerful that the vase explodes in infinite small little particles. So he asks the cooperation of people to get those particles back into the reconstruction, into the regeneration of the vase. That's me. That's what I do all the time. Please. You've got your microphone.
Okay. I don't have such a peut-être en français.
I'm going to say that in French. My metaphor won't be so good to talk about what's in my guts. On the other hand, I think it's a great idea to start. I can hear the translation at the same time. To start in what you have in your guts when you are in formal settings, official settings, the language that we use changes. And why we're interested in such topics, it's because it resonates in you deep down with our humanity or our interest with nature, for people. Personally, how can I define myself? I'm very enthusiastic. I tend to see beauty in certain things, and I decide to focus on beauty rather than look at the horrors that we see in the world. And I try to translate this for other people, to try and show it and try to spread it and make sure that it puts seeds. So I feel like a medium for my project. That starts from the project, people who draw inspiration, people who change the world, and try to give this to other people who might want to take up the flame, make it light again. Hello. I'd like to thank the forum for this invitation. It's the second time I've been invited here. I have the honor here of speaking. I'm Sename. I'm an architect and anthropologist, and I have a platform, African Architecture, that tries to do neo-vernacular, in the sense that we're thinking about how to make architecture and build the city with modest sort of resources by staying in a very small configuration of an African society. And since 2012, I'm also part of a digital solidarity project, which I will mention later, which I'll talk about later. Hello, Philippe Barre. I'm the founder of an ecosystem called Darwin in Bordeaux. I'm a father of 5 children. First 2 are half Schnorr, for those who are here, because their mother is from Tourcoing. So for them, it's also the house of my children here. For those of you who welcoming me here, the reason why I try to basically commit myself in the project I'll mention later on is the fact that it's the result of what my children will have to experience in the future, in the very near future. That will also be our future. But I consider that my children are less responsible than me. And we mustn't deceive ourselves. Sometimes I think it's too late. I think it's enough to read all the reports, which basically very tentatively reports that are not alarm-stricken. They all say that, these reports, that the future will never be as good as what we might have experienced in the previously. Collapse is near certain in the very near future. And when I think that, and you asked us to speak with our guts, so that's what I'm saying. Maybe I'll shock a few people. I think that even if there's nothing else to do, out of compassion and honor for my children, I have to try all the same. I have to try to lessen that impact, that shock, the future shocks. And that's what I'm trying to do very modestly every day, with more or less success, with lots of failures as well. But I think that we owe it to ourselves to be clear about the future and to try and have some hope without desire or pleasure. You might not find the strength that is necessary to actually face up to what's happening. I think collective initiatives that might be the result of this throughout the planet. There are a few here, there are so many around the world. It's an archipelago of awareness that's springing up everywhere. It brings, as you said, Léa, with enthusiasm, with desire, it brings a glimmer of hope. And that's what keeps me standing. For me, for my children, essentially. And if I'm able to share in the discussion, well, I think I would have played my role.
Thank you. So, Sename, what did you share that WOW Lab initiative? I don't know how to pronounce WOW Lab.
WOW Lab. Alors, donc, je vais partager,
I'm going to share in 10 minutes this small experiment that we've actually started in Lomé since 2012. It starts Can't you? Why don't you take headsets? Tell him to get some headsets. We're here for that. If he can't understand the French, we're here. Yeah, that's it. Is that okay now? Can you hear? We'll do our best for you as well. So, you probably know African cities tend to get urbanized very quickly. The demographic is exponential there, which means that the African population might double in size in the next 30 years, which means that we'll be faced with an unprecedented situation. African cities will be the laboratories of major challenges that are so great that we doubt whether town planning, regular town planning, will be able to provide answers. So the idea is to know whether Africa is ready to actually tackle this. The answer would be no. We're not ready for that at all. But what I'd like to say is that it doesn't matter whether you're not ready today, because we're living at a strange time. There's no point in being ready, because the world changes constantly. The civilization are accelerating. We seem to change civilization every year or every 2 years. So being ready could be a hindrance. What you have to do is to be ready. And the means of these revolutions are there. With the IT, we have to use this human aspect of the networks. We have this ability to make everybody participate. We have no monopolistic, centralized system to go towards more distributed systems where everyone can play a role. It's clear that the World Forum knows that full well. We all know what potential there is in that. So, faced with the problem of African cities, African decision makers would like to make smart cities because it's fashionable. These decision makers do not seem to have fully understood the possibility that there is of getting everybody involved, of engaging. They're very top-down sort of projects led by European companies, $12 billion, which will basically overburden our societies for many years. That's in Ghana, Africa, and here in Togo, Lomé Smart City. So as you can see, there's a lack of African presence is all this, lack of inclusion. These cities might create social segregations. They'll be the cities for the rich. The technologies will be imported. So we're talking about African smart cities, but with American technology, most probably. So that's the problem that we wanted to address by thinking about urban utopia in Togo. We thought there's another urban model that we can design, and the smart city is already null is already past, a thing of the past. It's a paradox because as soon as your smart city is built, it will already be obsolete because a new technology will supersede it. So the smart city should be based not on technology, but on what technology allows you to do as an enabler, as they say. So we try to imagine what the smart city might be. Here you can call it the city of the third industrial revolution, co-city, sharing city, we call it in Togo. We call it Up City project. We basically focus on the vernacular. In this new typology, places like Darwin or like Léa mentioned, the third places will play an important role in the genesis of this city. So the idea is to deploy a number of places in the city, fablab, co-working spaces. They all have the contract to impact their perimeter. The idea would be that you'd be working at changing things within a 2-kilometer radius around you. There might be a small power station. All the technologies that enable you to do this are technologies that are developed there locally with the resources that are available. People can come spontaneously to share, to learn together, and address the challenges. So we've created 2 spaces of this region, Walab 0 and Walab Pram, of 600,000 kilometers, which means that we are the largest take-up lab of this area. This is open to everyone. It's not elitist. You can have developers, seamstresses or seamsters. Anyone can come and be initiated to the new technologies and decide to solve a neighborhood problem. They draw their inspiration, these places, by the traditional context of areas of initiations where people gather in an area. They put themselves to the service of the village, they together, and also to identify the potential of each young people. And at the end of this reclusion period, the young person finds herself with a group or himself with a group and has an idea about their place in the village. So these places that we create, they will be like an initiation circle in order to learn about artificial intelligence, learn data with low-tech principles, and try to tackle the problems that they have. There's also another area, another element that enables the social cohesion. We have all sorts of rights, mourning rights, etc. We sort of reassert the links that have been experienced during the reclusion period. So these are moments which are ritual 2.0s for us. And all these events enable us to launch ideas, and we try to make startups out of those ideas. Startups can implement solutions more quickly than the decision maker. Startups are the best way of ensuring that the time to market is reduced. It's clear. So these are areas where there are project incubators that can change the city in order to achieve objectives more quickly. There are a dozen of startups or so in these first 2 places which we've created. I'll present 3 if I've got a bit of time. The first one is Scope. It's a platform that was launched in the first lab that enables us to collect plastic waste. So you subscribe and you get a kit at home where you put all your plastic waste. And when the kit is full, we alerted by the dustbin and we come and collect the waste at home. So we are now proving this, and 47 households do not produce any plastic waste because we collect them all we try to sell them to those who are interested in waste management. Another project, as a smart grid, is the urban attic, is to identify the areas that are around each lab, to basically turn them into vegetable patches. And you have a platform that make this the harvest, the organic harvest, visible, and you can be sure that what you collected hasn't been produced more than 1 kilometer than the area where you've ordered it. And the idea is to also have a shared kitchen so that people can cook inside the labs. So all these technologies use, all these projects use technologies. So we'll have sensors there that can measure the level of humidity, pH of the soil. And we also have a project in the field of education to make sure that we have 3D printers in all the schools on the territories where we're working, to enable schools to become a sort of experimental lab. So we do 3Ds for schools, and in the first lab, they are in the pilot phase for that. So we're training children, and the idea is to leave a printer in each lab, and when we've done the proof of concept, we'll basically widen the project. Maybe we know it. Our lab has created the first 3D printer made in Africa. It's made with recycled plastic waste. That's the first phase of the project that we've turned into the circular economy. The second phase we're going to launch are based on infrastructure in order to produce 3D printed buildings, because that way we can regain the traditional forms that we used to have, which we can't do with standard materials. We can have very curved materials or materials that are more African-looking. The idea is to identify in the city the first 2 areas that we've identified are rented. The idea is to have spaces where we can actually install the first lab of the network and then spread gradually over the whole territory. So that was, in a nutshell, what I've said. If you have questions, I'll give you more details. Thank you.
Congratulations. By the way, Siname, how many people participate in participate, and how many people you think are affected by the experience?
Je pense, moi je dis qu'on a
I would say that we don't count everyone, but must have trained about 250 young people since the start. We are at the origin of the tech scene. In 4 out of 5, I've gone through the WOLAB. But the places, you have the WOLAB 0, prime communities, and we try to stabilize the community at 30 because it's the maximum we can manage per space.
Okay, now let's share a French experience. Okay, Philippe.
Alors nous, notre expérience.
Our experience actually is exactly the same. So I was actually listening very carefully. It's roughly the same thing, really. We started out in a very similar frame of mind. We started, let's say, about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, with the desire to set up a project. In Bordeaux, we were looking for 1,500 square meters. We had the resources. We didn't have the resources to go over that surface. And we didn't know the third place, where we didn't know the vocabulary. We had an incubator called Evolution that we created in 2005. And with this idea that we would have projects that are, because with my partners, we've been entrepreneurs since '95 in the web mainly, with entrepreneurial projects and also associative community projects, sports projects, ecological projects, with an idea of doing more with less and doing it together. This is what has guided us, and at one point, we couldn't find a place. We wanted a place that was already existing. We didn't want to destroy it, to build something new, or start from scratch. We already were thinking that it was important to repair the city rather than destroy it and rebuild it. And gradually, we found a place that was going to be rebuilt, and 90,000 square meters, and it was about to close down at 20,000 square meters of warehousing. So 10 times more than what we could do. So we were crazy enough to think that we could do it. And we were right, because we did it. And a lot of people told us that you have to be reasonable and realistic. And earlier on, we were talking about Satish Kumar, who said that when we say that you have to be realistic, and he sees what the realistic leaders of the world have done with this world, we'd rather be utopists. And we had this utopia of thinking that we could change scale to do with more people, because we realized that we had more and more entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, artists, citizens who wanted something else. And very quickly we realized that we could federate around our project Darwin, people who were coming from various horizons, and we could see something in the inspiration and aspiration. And in projecting, this is how we went from a slightly bigger scale, 20,000 square meters. Then we set up our own investment fund, because we didn't have the resources for our ambition. So, of course, we didn't interest the existing investment funds. So we set up our own, called Archipel. And then we have our own incubator, our investment fund. So together we created a real estate company. So they saw us as a rather friendly project. So they let us do it at first, thinking that we'd never make it, but it was nice to let us moderate and also talk about it. And this is how we put our foot in the door, and then the shoulder, and so on. And I will try not to snow you under figures, but today is 1,200 people working, 1,200 jobs, more than 700 at the site of Darwin, 200 companies, 50 community associations. We also have education, because we have an alternative immersion high school, again sharing with collection some initiatives, experimentation, labs, low and high tech, mixing a bit like what you do with your 3D printing. We also do that. We have 150 students everywhere on site, not just one place. We teach everywhere. We have a skate park, an urban farm, a nautical club. We have an emergency shelter for homeless people. We have festivals, concerts, rehearsal places, studios, co-working places, of course, for entrepreneurs. So it's very varied. We have the biggest organic restaurant serving 20,000 meals a month, with 70% of local food, vegetarian food, even though we offer a meat offer, not to exclude anybody, but rather for supporting and wanting people to make a transition. We have 6 times less CO2 emissions than in a classical place. The whole of our electricity is renewable, even though we try to reduce our electrical consumption, because I think that the best renewable energy is the one you don't use up. So we are in that spirit, always doing more with less, and with enthusiasm, with art and culture and pleasure and desire. I must assure you that we don't have the feeling that we're back to a logic. I'm trying to think the austere, the Middle Ages. Not at all. We don't have the impression of depriving ourselves. We have the feeling that we are living better, we are happier, and we do with much less, and it feeds us. It gives us the desire to go further. And today, we welcome a lot of people at Darwin. Over 1 million visitors a year who come and visit Darwin. We are the second place, the most visited in Bordeaux, since we're not dedicated to tourism at all, but we give something that people want to see today. And when we see that in Lomé, there's the same thing happening, we'll see that probably that the same thing is happening in Rio and other places. So we're saying the same thing. It's different, of course, but our cultures are different, but it's a good thing it's different. We're sick and tired, and I took part in that, so I know I can say I'm very comfortable. For 15 years, was actually instrumental to the web and communications and the overconsumption society. Our cities are more made the same Starbucks, the same McDonald's. We are smoothing out our culture, annihilating our diversity. We need to find differentiation elements, but we still can find common links in terms of humanity, universality, while having our differences and our specific aspirations. And this is what we try and do on a daily basis. It's a bit complicated. For us, sometimes it's been complicated. It's been more tense because we have now become a lighthouse in this way of doing, building the city. So we radiate differently. And the fact that we are a hub of attractiveness, attracting the attention, makes it that today we have now started a fight, a battle with the local lobby of the real estate, and they want to kick us out. I will not go into the explanations, but the explanations are not really interesting, and they are really a bit nauseous. But they are the symbol of a process that is unavailable, an old world that is still at play today and cannot bear the fact that it's going to lose power, that it can lose some spaces that they thought was only for them, and to see emerge some new solutions, new initiatives that show a different way, and at the end of the day do not use the same path. So it scares them. It scares certain people who don't want things to change and want to continue with this predation that today scarifies our city, destroys social link, and throws us into the wall. And we have to face today something that is quite brutal and violent, which is now joined by the politicians who think that they can see in our ecosystem opponents that want to take over power, while we just want to trace our path and be part of a more global inspiration that exceeds us. The specific interests and egos of this particular power is not interesting to us. But if you take part in redistributing redealing the cards, it scares some people. And this generates a rather brutal resistance, and you have to accept it. And this is probably the message I'd like to tell you. It's not easy to have a more resilient alternative. You have to accept that it goes through a fight, that it goes through moments that are more difficult and brutal, and goes through resistance. And at the same time, we have to go and find the necessary resources with passion and enthusiasm to generate innovation and sharing of wealth. Today, the commercial part at Darwin takes a kind of solidarity taxes to finance the non-profit part. And you have to continue in that logic to find the resources to show a positive way and progress on each leg in resistance and in defending what we think is going to be right, and at the same time to prove that we can improve in what we do not as well. Because at Darwin, like any other place, we're not pure, we're not exemplary, and there's still 20% of our waste that we do not valorize. We still have to progress on the reduction of our dependence on energy. And the list is long of the room we have for improvement. And it's important to be focused on this dynamic of progress because it holds us, and it's the one that will make it the fact that we'll still be here tomorrow. This is why we call Darwin, because we think it's important to always adapt, accept the change, and have the imagination of doubt.
Thank you, Philippe. Just before coming over here, I asked him if whenever he had these types of challenges, he would get depressed or if he would lose his optimism. So why don't you say something about the energy that results thanks to the energy that results because of the challenges?
Well, of course, because it's not always easy, because we have to go beyond our comfort zone, because it gives power that you don't even think you have. When I told you at first, it's 1,500 square meters to put our small co-working place with our friends and have a couple of exhibitions, at the same time an organic restaurant, and then a couple of shelters. And then 10 years later, we are here and then looking back at the fact that we're talking about 45,000 square meters with loads of different groups, with 15 users a week, 15,000 users a week, and a lot of subscribers taking advantage of that. So how did we find the force to do that? It's because when you take up the challenges that seemed incredible to all of us, when there's a difficulty, and then we say we cannot solve it, and at the top you have thousands of people who are knocking on our doors and saying, we can help you do that, and we come with you to do that. Well, it gives us such a momentum. And at the end of the day, you realize that we have a collective work while being with our own aspirations and then being respected in our reference. And this energy is undetected at first, and it does feed our projects.
Now, thank you. Leah, you've had an amazing opportunity in life to actually listen to your inner calls and create a project, Wide Open, that enables you to visit many of these initiatives throughout the world. And just before coming here also, we were sharing the fact that there's part of what's happening globally that still does not have a shared narrative. Why don't you share with us your lessons and some concrete cases that you've seen in different continents?
Avec plaisir.
With pleasure, with pleasure. To introduce my project called Wide Open, and why did I create it? What is the link with the others project, beautiful projects we've seen, is that over 2 years ago, imagine a place. Imagine it was my utopia, my personal utopia, that looked a bit like Darwin, actually, but at the time I had never heard about Darwin. And I became obsessed with this idea of the project. Imagine a collective place. Imagine that it would be in the Bordeaux area, where we could have the academic, private sectors, where we could imagine together possibilities, create pilots, and then change things and learn and build the city differently. And I talked about this project, and I realized that there was a concept behind it, and it was the concept of third places. If you don't know about this concept, no problem. It's no problem. And most of the third places I've seen around the world, I've never heard of the concept. So it's always an obligation to fit a concept on a place, especially if Oldenburg in 1989 talked about this concept in the Great Good Place as a resistance to the aggressive urbanization of American suburbs that created around what we call the sleeping suburbs, with no places where people would drive to, especially because in the States you drive everywhere, they sleep there, and they come back to the city to work in. And theorized the concept of third places, resisting to this, so that traditionally we had third places. There could be cafes and churches or hairdressers where people meet, which is not a workplace nor a residence, but these are places where you could experiment, co-create, places that are profoundly democratic, that you have to rebuild because we've destroyed them, forgot about them, and that we need to recreate that. So the very concept of the third place came as a resistance against the disappearance of these things and disappearing in our society. And I heard about loads of projects in the world who seem to have the same colors, this same dimension, this utopia of a place that would not only for its use, not only an incubator, not only a co-working place, not only a community center, but would integrate more dimensions with a collective approach. So rather than create my own place, I launched a project to find land and then to meet the people and see what is the common challenge. And we have two examples. It's exactly the reality of my work on a daily basis, which is to go on the field and meet these players. All these projects have got very concrete challenges that are common, which is the model, the business model. How do you survive? And then how do you include people? What kind of rapport with the building of the city, the vision that we have of society? And I launched this project by instinct, that maybe these players had a common vision, that maybe if we managed to unite them and coordinate international reflection, we could go faster and go from the anecdote, the extremely inspiring project that you only hear at the World Forum, to something that is systematic, we could replicate on our territories, where any human will could contribute to easily and build a project like this. Just like me at the time, I had this urgency to invest into a project like this, and I had no key on how to do it. How am I going to find the money? How am I going to find the players, what I'm going to do with the communities, what impact will I have, and so on and so forth. So I created a project, a field project, because I believe in experimenting. And most of these places explore the possibilities, where personalities launch themselves wholly into projects that would move them or drive them, that they would have in them, and they decided to follow their instincts and went through a number of bad experiences and have learned a lot. So over 6 months ago, I went to the States, to Canada, Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil, with several cities each time, to be immersed in these places and understand with the teams on the fields what are the lessons learned and how we transfer them, convey them. With two objectives with the independent project. The first one was to build a story, to try to start with storytelling. An idea can only exist if we talk about it. The word third place, I found it very ugly because it's mathematic. And the ecosystems, the positive ecosystem, is more of a true to reality, something alive, organic, that will change depending on community and the concept. And this is why, through videos and articles, I tried to tell stories to see what we're talking about, what kind of possibilities can we have, and how can tomorrow potentially you could contribute to the creation of an ecosystem like this. And the second part of the project is more of research. Desktop research is collective research to try and coordinate reflection with these field players, because with think tanks as well, because research develops as I meet people with inspired people who want to contribute to it, and we try to coordinate together a reflection that will lead to a collective writing of a guide with international inspiration and a number of keys, practical hints and tips. It will not be a guide of the perfect third place. It doesn't exist. A third place is always the reflection of accumulation of this will and the context, the historical, cultural, economic context. But anyway, give a number of milestones that will help go faster and not make the same mistakes as those who have started project from scratch. So the idea is to structure a network, try to do things together, to go from the anecdote to a more systemic change. So I will quickly, I don't know how much time left I have. I'll talk about a couple of different examples to try and show you the diversity of these ecosystems and what they show that is really innovative, inspiring, that we could project to our territories. The first one is the American one. So we'll try and bring in be an ambassador of 3 ecosystems from the Americas. The first one is Pony Ride, was created in 2011 by Phil, a cabinet maker, who is so I don't know if you're familiar with the context of Detroit. Detroit City is the former automotive capital of the States. It was the place where all Chrysler, General Motors, and the like had their headquarters. And starting from the 70s, the city collapsed through a number of negative factors, relocation of jobs, crisis, corruption. And the city was actually lost half of its population and transformed into an apocalyptic land with jobless communities, center of the city without water and electricity, a city that could not even afford to destroy the ruins or pay the police or secure any street. So a lot of violence. It was the capital of crime for many years. And today in Detroit, you can feel an energy of resilience, rebuilding, and above all, co-building on new possibilities. We have strong communities of makers who want to change things, who do things, don't wait for people to take them by hand. And he had a lot of friends who were makers, so he said, why wouldn't I buy a building, a ruin, so that we can rebuild it together and then see what we can do together. So what he said, he called his friends, they destroyed some walls, they painted them, created workshops, and collectively decided what they would do with that place. They wanted this place to have an impact on the community. They can rebuild Detroit, not just a project out of nowhere. But they didn't know and they hadn't planned what they would do with that. So the community gave the colors to the place. And at the end of the day, today, this is a very positive system for the city of Detroit, who have created jobs. It's more the positive project incubator, and probably one of the few players in an extremely violent situation of the history stand. With 83%, we have an exclusive white center who have come to invest into startups or creative economy in large buildings built by millionaires, just the American way, you know. And within that context is one of the few players who want to have a development of Detroit that is inclusive with the most fragile communities. And it is both a space for meeting, a dance studio, co-working space, a place where entrepreneurs from industry, we have sewing, circular economy, we have designers, graphic artists, we have artists where they meet, co-create solutions for the city of Detroit. And Pony Rider has become a very widely recognized brand locally, internationally, that combines economic performance, respect to communities, and positive impact. So this is one of the possible economic development models that had made the active choice of inclusion, starting with friends, with white makers, and then they realized they were all white. So they said, no, this is not what we want to do. So tomorrow we have an after choice of selecting communities that don't have a stretched hand today. That was the first example. Sorry, I have to go quickly, but unfortunately I don't have that much time. And then the second type of ecosystem will help me talk about transitory urbanization, which is another way, another temporary ecosystem. And Project Young is the transitory urbanism of the city of Montreal. The association Entremise was enthusiastic about international expansive. This is the importance of storytelling for the birth of our project. Was inspired by projects like Le Grand Voisin in Paris or Logo MT in New York, and persuaded the city of Montreal to organize the first conference on this question, to have people from all different sectors to think together of how could tomorrow transitory urbanization could be a solution to empty buildings. So at the end, it became evident for everyone that we have to implement transitory urbanism. We had to open these empty buildings and let communities to create something together, especially as it meant a very concrete problem. It's an issue. Empty building cost an issue. Also, it's also on the vision of communities and especially for the question of the heritage is linked to vacancies.
So they've decided the public authorities to deal with this, and the first transition plan was launched. 22 months. Basically, you will get the entrepreneurs that will have a positive impact on the city will be there, and they'll have this opportunity together to have a space for nothing. They wouldn't be able to have a space at all, and then they find a space, they can have a positive impact, and they'll be able to work with the local communities to build locally the community that will be ready to welcome the sort of project to come. So how can we prepare communities that will basically be able to put this into practice, and it can influence this urban construction? So the real issue is how can you create, as a result of transition town planning, organs where basically life becomes the rule of the game. How can we create nests of ownership of such issues by citizens? People will be able to realize that they form a community, but they also have the duty and the collective responsibility to influence this urban construction for it to be more alike, basically, or like them. And then we'll have social housing is a second step. Maybe you can have a collective area on the basement, which could open up new possibilities and widen the field of experiments. What was interesting in this model is the collective local experimentation, which for me is the sign of a small local transition. And I do believe in this, the fact that you can have a transition locally by local approaches. That's what you seem to be doing in your project. You start with the communities locally, then you multiply the initiatives and see how you can have a transition, not just individually at the level of consciousness, but also as a society. What is interesting in this model is that it's a way for the private people to familiarize, to get acquainted with what is unknown. It's all experimental. Legally, we don't know what's going to come out of that. There's an unknown to this, but which is necessary for collective innovation. It's also a way of giving culture to these areas, rethinking about the rebuilding of the social construction, but in some sort of bottom-up movement. Can I give you a third example? I've been speaking for too long. So another modality of this ecosystem, a cultural one in Bogota, has enabled the rehabilitation of a very hot neighborhood of Bogota, which is split between the north, which is rich, and the south, very poor and criminalized, and which has created an ecosystem in one of the neighborhoods that is particularly difficult, dedicated to communities, particularly young people, and has opened a skate school, community journal, to work on consciousness, and in the end has actually been able to invert the tendency of the devaluation of that particular district. So it's clear that there were major mafia-like sort of symbols that were being used. So you can devalue a district, you stop picking the bins, for example. So the crime rises, and you only talk about the crimes that are taking place in these areas. And this has been going on for 10 years, and then you can devalue such districts. And as a result of this ecosystem, they were able to debunk the system. I think that I'm very sorry for speaking for so long. There are so many issues about those third places, which are transversal. That's why I decided to have an international team of designers, architects, philosophers, entrepreneurs, anthropologists, who are asking the right questions, who are there on the ground, and we're thinking together about how tomorrow we can help public players, associations, individuals who might contribute to this movement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We've just shared different initiatives, but I just want to show my body. This little body, this short body, was born 66 years ago, and when I was born, we were only just below 2.6 billion people, 2,600 million people, right? The same body now shares this life experience with over 7.3 billion people. In the same earth, with the same logic of infinite growth, with the same DNA that was created, say, 300 years ago, And obviously Einstein was right. We can't solve the kind of problems we're facing with the same mindset that has created those problems. So we've just heard these many different initiatives, but at the same time, we face the results, the global results of the economic system that we created, that has created lots of wealth, lots of results, but it's not being effective any longer. This logic of here making money, here having to cope, mitigating the effects of the economic system, and here mitigating the social and the environmental effects. I mean, it's not efficient to be organized that way. So that's the reason we started System B. Why? Because at least in our part of the world, politics was dividing us from the left and from the right, as the political dynamics is divisive, and it polarizes ourselves. So we need to get back together as the common unity. Where shall we actually build social cohesion, build collective trust, and have the spaces of convergence beyond agreement on everything? Because we build togetherness as part of the human project on Earth. Togetherness. It's more important than agreement, always. The value of togetherness above the value of agreement. So our experience in Latin America has been to start with a new business genetics. How many of you know about the B Corps here? Just raise your hands. So there are quite a few. This is a new market identity that rather than having profit as the main purpose, it's value creation, solution creation as the main purpose that is protected legally. Protected legally. And at the same time, it's subject to a third-party evaluation, assessment, and measurement of the integrated impact of these kinds of companies. And at the same time, we expand the fiduciary liability. Do you know fiduciary liability? The shareholder primacy, everybody knows that? It's more important the shareholder's interest than the rest. So what we do is expand that, so there's an equilibrium between short-term interest and long-term interest, between the shareholder's interest and all the other stakeholders' interest. That's what we do in System B. So in our case, we belong to a kind of environment where we said, it's over. There's no way we can only have small little projects. However, that's the logic that we developed down there. Down there, I mean, Casa B is the reflection of the letter B, not the letter A. The letter B is the letter that we actually present as the letter of infinite innovation linked to economy, all right? So there are many, many ecosystems, but we start with a new economic business-driven sector, all right? And the main message is we want business as a force of good. We want markets as a force of good. Now, having said all of that, that's my experience. At the same time, one shares very concrete experiences which are very successful, that we call them ecosystem innovations, right? And I would say, why don't we redefine the notion of markets? And we talk about market innovations, because they all have the same principles as the old markets in all of our cultures. You know, community building, sharing. That was the way it was, many thousands of years ago. And there's no reason for which not to go back to the same principles, the market principles that used to be in place before. So, having said that, I'd like to ask you, what do you feel about how to accelerate the inspirational process of these very concrete initiatives so we really go fast global? And secondly, how through these initiatives and the interconnection of these initiatives with many others can actually give us the hope that if we actually do the changes in the system, in the markets, not any longer only through politics, but also through the markets, we can actually cope with climate change, lower the global warming, at least in the medium term, massive migrations, lower the inequality gap. So that's my challenge to all of you and to all of you. Okay, who's going to be a voluntary and will come and sit here? Who wants to come? Yeah, come on, with courage. And you can ask questions, you can make comments. Of course, we can start before, but is being timid something normal here? Yeah, you want to say something. I know, that face, yeah, I'm sure, yeah. You don't, are you sure? No?
Maybe.
Yeah, come over, yeah. So the next people, you just stand behind wherever you want to sit. And you ask questions or...
La personne ne doit pas rester là, hein. C'est pas pour tout.
You mustn't stay here. You can come, ask questions, and other people can come and questions. You don't have to stay there forever. You just take your turn.
Okay.
Merci.
I'm going to ask two questions. For a start, I'm a citizen, a ratepayer, a voter. I want to be very specific. As a result of the problem with the climate that we had last week, there are various initiatives that are actually being launched here in the Lille area, or there are groups of citizens. They deposited the GIEC report. So I wanted to know, we maybe were a bit different as far as the Darwin is concerned, that you have someone who was a project promoter who maybe cooperated with the politicians, but we don't have a project, we don't have a concrete project, and we have to convince lots of decision makers that they have to let people basically launch the project. Do you think it might work? What are the good examples that you can give in order to encourage such decision makers? And as a business person, I'm a shareholder in a family group that has a very traditional economic way of dealing with things. How can we change the economic indicators? How can we change the economy to shed light on initiatives such as ours, focus more on your type of initiatives, because profitability is very difficult to explain as to it's difficult to imagine when you launch on such projects as yours. It might be more difficult, might be easier if you're an architect to go and work on building a supermarket, or rather than the creation of a third place. We have this. We have a derelict land in the Saint-Sauveur area. There's a real debate as to whether people want to build residential area for the up and coming, or a third place for down planning, really. I don't know why I was saying all that, actually. I've lost myself in all this. There isn't really a question. It gives me, I feel like replying to you on the first observations, which is really relevant on the climate change in Darwin. We've taken part at our level in this, and we've already opened all the areas, basically, to all the collectives who might want to prepare their banners, their posters, so that they could exchange if they wanted to as to how it should take place and should be done. And the municipality came to Darwin because we opened these areas so that it's not just a demonstration. All the various groups could be working together in an agora, put forward solutions. And of course, the emergence of this spontaneous emergence of demonstration is not contradictory. One does not exclude the other. Does this make our decision makers think to open up the gates? Not really, but all the same, we still have to carry on. You have to take over power. When I say you take it over, not necessarily to actually go to the municipality, behead the head of the mayor or somebody else's. You take it every day. We are the masters of our destinies. Martin Luther King said that the right laws have to be respected, the others, those that aren't have to be disobeyed. So it should be our motivation, at least in France. We're rather fatalistic and obedient. Sometimes you have to refuse what is unacceptable. As to the question that you're asking, as an entrepreneur in a family group, how do you make things change? It's called disruption. I can tell you about that because I come from a family that was in the large supermarket. I know that very well. My parents were in that sort of line of business. I could have carried on, and maybe I would have a Maserati by now, things that are totally useless, but which socially correspond to a certain vision of what is called success. Sometimes you have to make a choice to be a disruptor, to renounce certain things, and of course, you can't convince everybody immediately. Those who are hardest to convince are actually those who are next to you, your next of kin. I can guarantee that you know, if I'd waited for my family to actually agree on my project, it would have been impossible. They had no trust whatsoever in what I was saying or thinking about. For them, it was completely mad, completely crazy. So you mustn't hesitate to renounce convincing them. You have to act. It's by doing that you find. So then you consciously decided to do things on your own rather than to go it alone with fewer means rather than using the help of existing structures, because the effort was more important to try and convince. I didn't reason that, but I didn't do it thinking, okay, I'm doing it like that. I didn't think that consciously, just I was more inspired in doing that. It wasn't for Darwin. I was 23 at the time. I decided to create my own website with hardly any means, hardly any resources. And then when I saw that I wasn't really finding, it wasn't really my cup of tea, that I found the same pitfalls. Yet again, I decided to break away and renounce this success that I was promised in what we talked about the new technologies at the time, because I saw the same problem resurfacing. You can see it now with the GAFA, because there's a global predation, basically, business as usual. So you have to have the courage to leave your comfort zone and renounce privileges, renounce easier things. You have it, the meaning, then meaning becomes something really that is true to you. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have actually met such fascinating people who make my everyday life fascinating again. I'd like to react on this to say that you were talking about renouncing. There's more to be won, even individually, even if it's not the success. You'll be learning some amazing things, and all the project promoters I've met, I didn't wait to be supported, nor did they wait to have the resources. Things came to them, and things were created. So what I wanted to say is that if you think that you're thinking of doing something like that, or changing a traditional business by giving it a business, just go ahead with it. Do not expect any approval, nor the funding that is required. It's by doing that things happen. I react to what Philippe said, the resistance. I think you have to take over power. This right to cities, right to reconstruct our cities, we have to take it. We don't have to wait till to say, it's up to you to decide what to do. You have to have some lobbying. You have to try and do things now. You were talking about the march on the climate. I was in Paris last Saturday, and I was a bit disappointed, very disappointed, to feel that we were marching, of course, but I was expecting action out of that. I was expecting them to say, okay, just come. We have the Société Générale, the bank. We will put we put red on our hands, and we put our marks on the windows, and we go and try and think things out together. And I was very frustrated not to have this action here and now. So we have to stop talking. You have to start creating places. We all feel like doing it, but we have to leave that inertia. The best action is every day, is through what we buy. The Société Générale, which is a bank, you can always put red your red hands there, but you just have to boycott them. My question deals with what are the first stages I say to myself, okay, I've got an idea, I want to develop it. For example, at home, I got from Guadeloupe. I've got an idea. What are the first stages? Who should I go to? How can you convince these young people who maybe are not so aware of these problems? How can I get them, bring them alongside what I'm doing? How can I actually regain ownership of these areas or finding the funding?
Je n'ai pas de méthodologie pour.
I have no set method to launch this type of place, and I'm still too much involved in that and not have enough hindsight to extrapolate and to do this sort of how to do. Leah's work is very important for this aspect. What I know is that on paper at first, the festivals preceded the places. So in the city, we had a kind of giant hackathon and talked about architects, people live in the city, And at the end of this, we would create a place that would continue developing solutions that we'd imagine at the camp. And this was supposed to create the place with the human resources around it. So the very first camp we did, I called my mom. I was a student in France, and I said, I come and do a workshop to launch one first lab and then replicate it and change the city. Could she find me a place that would accept having this camp? She had a friend who lended us a schoolroom, classroom, 9 meters. And now I've got so many square meters, but it's not because we follow the methodology, but it's just each time we need to change scale, we give ourselves the resources to do it, and we didn't stop. Otherwise, we'd have stopped within 3 months. So we didn't need to mobilize financial resources. Well, of course, yes, we did. The project talked about cost us about 3,000 euros a month, and we are self-financed. So you need money, and we try to find it with great difficulty, but we managed to do it because it's a purposeful, meaningful project, so it can maintain itself in place. On this question, how do you have some keys with this team, and so what makes it a project that is going to work out or be born, very often is the partners who haven't waited for all resources to make it happen. They found people, allies, and not necessarily coming from the places they expected, and created places and a projection of the fantasy of what a territory needed. So they didn't put the vision on, I think on that territory we need to create a food lab where people would meet, and it's great enough that they can share the recipes and all that. No, they created links that were receptacles of these communities. So they started by listening to the community, working with them, and the place was an answer. And it came as to welcome and preserve that dynamics. So you shouldn't design places in ivory towers disconnected from communities, but start looking at the local symptoms to see what these communities could do and what kind of answer could be given by a place. You could create an ecosystem that you could trigger. And I think that it starts like that through the community more than talk about finances. To listen to the community, see what they want to do. And you can do it alone, you can do it at people's places. From the moment that you start with that common desire, you can do anything. Fun, and it's usually what works. And it's very important to be fun and work together.
Oui, bonjour. Du coup, moi, je vais parfois dans des...
So I sometimes go to third places in Paris or Lille. What you have is diversity of social inclusion, but first you can have that in the first, and then very easily we have a gentrification of places. If you go to the city center or next to the city, the favored audience will go there, will come with friends, will have a party, and probably change the place. It will not become a mixed city, but a place where during the day you'll have activities with people with the community, and at night or other periods, other events, will have just young people who come and party. There'll be no social mixing. It's probably different for you, but how can you do that, create that? And what is the solution for that? Are you talking about the gentrification, or there's actually an issue of social terre. On this issue, it talks about the gentrification or bourgeoisization of will bourgeois always chase the lower classes? Well, I like your question because it tells you about. I don't like this aspect of a third place to say that it's not exactly a party place or working place, so it's a kind of a third way So it's a kind of definition by negative. We don't know what it is. Why we should know what it is, of this, what these places are. And it's even more of a mine in France because tiers-lieux, the French hear it based on what Michel Foucault said about the utopia and then the heterotopia. What Foucault tells heterotopia is not what we do. Foucault talks about heterotopia by designing places that don't take part in society, which are exoteries like places for crazy people or cemeteries. And utopia is there to relieve yourself, doesn't transform the actual society. Third place is what we have built are not heterotopia as Michel Foucault means it, but places that we think that could have an impact on the environment. And when you approach it that way, it doesn't become a bourgeois place where you have a little thing to have the impression that you've escaped from this capitalistic system for the time you spent in that space.
Thank you. We don't have that much time any longer.
I just wanted to answer this question because it's really important. And for us, it was the other way around, actually. I'm your typical bourgeois bohème, and your typical actually assume that role, no problem. So it was done via a bunch of bobos, as we call them. So we attracted quite a few of them, those neo-hippies, bourgeois people. And the more that as we long, it's very often Darwin says for bobos. I'm very proud of the fact that the audience is cross and very diverse and mixed. But it requires truly to open up and be careful of welcoming the widest diversity. You shouldn't decree it. What's very important that you shouldn't have a quota of calculating, but you have to welcome and you have to open up. You will have bobos, but you will have other people. When we welcomed Emmaüs, we had an emergency center, shelter, then we opened the door so that we had like football supporters that came and have their party there, and that's we must not have any preconceived ideas, and all this get all mixed up joyfully.
We just have one more minute. Let me say something. My experience in the city of Mendoza, you know Mendoza, the place where the Malbec comes, that was recovered from France? That's Mendoza. Mendoza has now a new law. The city of Mendoza has a new law that has a preference of buying to companies that create social and environmental positive impact solutions and pays 3% more than to any other company. And if you're local, it pays 5% more. And this happened not because there was an agreement with a politician, there was a conversation, a negotiation. It was because an individual in the city who was the legal advisor of the procurement department, he was moved by the whole notion. And he said, what shall I do? So he got back home, he drafted the legislation, he went to the mayor and he said, this will give you votes because this is happening. And the man said, okay, let's make a decree, but let's send it to the legislature, to the local legislature. And it was passed by unanimous voting by the left, the center, and the right. And now that legislation is being an inspiration for the provincial level, for the national level, and for other countries and other cities in the region. And it was all triggered by this. It wasn't this. Before we were coming, I was saying, I'm not sure if I'm going to be challenging here in France rationalism. But let me tell you something. With all respect, we've learned a lot, it helped us a lot, but we need to integrate this part with the guts, with what makes us feel that we can move ahead. Regardless where we are, we can be in a huge, large multinational. And if we have that and we listen to the guts, we'll do it. And things can change. So thank you very much. Very, very much. I'm very pleased to have been here as a moderator. Sorry if I tapped in the Latin American experiences, but it has been a great pleasure, very inspiring. Thank you to you, thank you to you, thank you before you. So a big hug. Until next time.